After facing numerous difficulties, Cass Anderson realizes the importance of valuing both the highs and lows in her life. One way or another, everything eventually falls into place. Cass teaches at a theater school. Her students adore her, especially a young man named Anderson. He had a long chat with Cass about her husband and then wished her a pleasant vacation. Today Cass plans to meet John Collins and other colleagues at a bar to celebrate the start of the holidays. Cass had a great time. John offered to walk her home, but she politely declined. Despite the bad weather, Cass wasn't afraid to drive. Before leaving, she received a call from her husband, who was exhausted and planning to go to bed before she returned. Cass promised not to drive through the forest, a shorter but more dangerous route. Heavy rain was making visibility difficult. Against her husband's wishes, Cass chose to drive through the forest. She tried to drive carefully, especially since the GPS wasn't working. That night, Cass witnessed a tragedy on the night road. At 9 in the morning, Cass's husband Matthew woke her up. He had already heard that a woman perished on the road last night. Strangely, Cass hadn't told anyone about what she saw. Online, Cass found an article about the incident. So it wasn't just a dream? After breakfast, Cass met her best friend Rachel at a restaurant. Rachel knows John has been in love with Cass for a long time, even though she's married. There are rumors that John's first wife went missing, but Cass believes it's just gossip, thinking the woman simply moved away. 20 years ago Cass used to perform in theater, but now she just teaches, and she enjoys it. On the other hand, Cass wouldn't mind returning to acting, though Matthew probably wouldn't support her, as they're planning to have a child. Later, the friends strolled around the city. Cass mentioned her interest in tarot cards, which she uses to connect with her late mother. Rachel was surprised to realize Cass had forgotten she was supposed to choose a group gift for Susie. It seems Cass is starting to have memory issues. She really does have trouble remembering certain recent events. At home, Cass saw a strange man outside the window, but Matthew didn't notice anyone. He thought his wife might be hallucinating again, though she denied it. Soon Susie's birthday party took place. Rachel mentioned that the woman who perished on the road was her company's employee. Susie was also very upset since she knew the woman. Now the woman's husband has to raise their 2-year-old twins alone. The woman's name was Jane Walters. Cass realized she knew her. Despite everything, Susie tried to stay upbeat. It was her day after all. Cass introduced John to her husband. That night, Matthew couldn't sleep, wondering who might have wanted to harm Jane. What happened to her wasn't an accident but a crime. Cass believes they should get a dog for safety, but Matthew is against it, thinking a pet wouldn't be ideal if they're planning for a child. While Matthew went downstairs to ensure everything was locked, Cass received a call from an unknown number. All she heard was static and breathing. Maybe someone got the wrong number. In the morning, Cass found a note from her husband asking her to call him. The news was reporting on the road tragedy. Jane's husband, Alex Walters, is determined to uncover the truth. Cass felt like she wasn't alone in the house. Or was it just her imagination? As she walked down the hallway, a shadow followed her. Cass's panic grew, and another call came from an unknown number. Like before, she only heard wheezing. A worker from a security company came to update their system. Cass felt uncomfortable around the unfamiliar man and asked him to return another time when her husband was home. Later, Cass went to the site where Jane's body had been found. In the grass she noticed an earring. Suddenly there was a rustle from the bushes, but it was just a fox. Cass hurried away. At home, she found a matching earring among her belongings. Clearly they were Cass's earrings. That evening, trying to calm herself, Cass took a bath, but the anxiety didn't leave her. In tears, Cass called her husband and shared her fears. She felt like someone was in the house. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Cass thought her husband had called the police, but the officers were actually there about Jane Walters' case. Cass admitted that she had seen a car on the roadside that night but didn't think the driver was dead. Of course the police found it strange that Cass hadn't stopped to help. Matthew was frustrated that his wife hadn't told him about it and that she had driven through the forest despite his request. But Cass seemed not to hear him, repeatedly asking who had opened the window. Cass was sure she had closed it. When Matthew mentioned that he'd soon be leaving on a business trip for a few days, Cass was upset that he hadn't told her earlier. Matthew assured her that he'd mentioned it 3 weeks ago. The next day, Cass called her friend and shared her worries. Rachel promised to visit as soon as she could. Later, Cass received another call from an unknown number. She didn't expect to see Andrew at her doorstep, who had come to return her book. When she asked how he knew where she lived, the young man replied that everyone in the area knew the Andersons had bought the old Crawford house. Rumor had it that the place was haunted. Andrew clearly wanted to discuss the book with his favorite teacher, but she politely said she had to leave. Cass was supposed to meet her colleague Mary at the theater school today, but John said he had personally driven Mary to the airport yesterday. Cass found this odd, as she had exchanged messages with Mary just yesterday. However, the messages had somehow disappeared. John expressed how sorry he was about Jane, who had been very kind. They used to play golf together until her jealous husband forbade it. Jane always tried to please Alex. Confused by her memory lapses, Cass gladly accepted John's invitation to have lunch tomorrow. After all, Matthew was away. Unfortunately, Rachel couldn't visit Cass today as promised because her dinner with a client ran late. Cass was understanding. Matthew was still on his trip. Left alone, Cass started spiraling into paranoia again. She heard creaking noises in the house and checked all the rooms. At one point, her panic reached its peak. Cass tried her best to calm down, but to no avail. Even her tarot cards predicted misfortune. Once again, an unknown number called. On the verge of a nervous breakdown, Cass broke into uncontrollable sobs. That night, Cass woke up to a whisper calling her name. She immediately thought it was her mother. Seeing a sinister silhouette in the mirror, Cass ran, but the front door wouldn't open for some reason. She locked herself in one of the rooms. Someone was rattling the doorknob and breaking dishes. Cass called the police. However, the officers found no signs of a break-in or broken dishes. Moreover, they discovered that Cass had been hospitalized in a psychiatric facility a year and a half ago. Detective Constable Lawson decided to keep an eye on this family. The next day, trying to let go of her fears, Cass had lunch with John. She told him about the strange things happening to her lately. Could it somehow be connected to Jane? Cass also mentioned that her student Andrew had recently returned a book to her. John suggested the young man might have a crush on his teacher and was now harassing her with constant calls and other actions. After lunch, Cass and John took a short walk. He tried to kiss her, but she pulled away and apologized. Cass truly valued John but couldn't betray her husband. Finally, Matthew returned from his business trip. He was very worried about his wife. Maybe it was the side effects of the medication she'd been prescribed after her mother's demise. Cass assured her husband that she hadn't signed a contract for installing a security system, but Matthew insisted she had. Cass had no recollection of it. That night, after Matthew fell asleep, Cass went through his belongings and found a letter from her former psychiatrist. The next day, Cass desperately tried to recall the night Jane perished. Cass disliked how Matthew often brought up the topic. Detective Lawson visited the Andersons and asked about Jane's husband. Cass said Jane always spoke well of Alex. Later, Cass found a note from Alex on the porch thanking her for the flowers and inviting her over. At that moment, Cass saw Andrew near her house again. Meeting with Rachel, Cass said she could no longer stay in that house. What frightened her the most was the fact that the person who had taken Jane's life was still at large. Cass visited Alex, who deeply missed his wife. On the day Jane perished, she had a late meeting at the office, but Alex didn't know with whom. Sometimes he suspected his wife of infidelity, considering John, her tennis partner, one of her potential lovers. In the morning, a delivery man brought a baby stroller and a jumpsuit to the Andersons' house. Cass had allegedly placed the order. Matthew was delighted, believing that his wife was pregnant. After all, Sheila, to whom Cass had supposedly mentioned it, had congratulated him the day before. Cass insisted that she wasn't pregnant and hadn't talked to Sheila about anything like that. She also denied placing the order. Matthew gently tried to persuade his wife to see a psychiatrist. Cass didn't want to, but she had no choice. From the patient's medical history, Dr. Deakins learned that Cass's mother had begun to suffer from dementia at the age of 55. Even though Cass was still young, the hereditary disease could start progressing now. Matthew purchased all the necessary medications for his wife. She couldn't come to terms with her diagnosis. Alex met with Detective Lawson and told her that Cass had visited him recently. He also recalled how before the tragedy Jane had mentioned that an acquaintance of hers was having an affair. Matthew went to bed earlier than his wife. When she began switching TV channels, the screen flickered with static, and then her mother's face appeared, taking on sinister features. Cass ran, chased by shadows, calling for her husband. In the kitchen, she saw a knife. Matthew came running to his screaming wife, who was repeating something incoherent. Naturally, he assumed it was another one of her delusional episodes. Matthew wanted Cass to start taking stronger medications. She just cried, repeating that she wasn't insane. In the morning, Cass woke up to a message on the answering machine. Matthew was already at work. Hearing a child's cry outside, Cass went out of the house. On the lawn lay a blanket. Underneath it, she found a dead bird and ran back inside in fear. Cass didn't understand what was happening to her. This made her finally take the pills. Afterward, she fell into a deep sleep. Some time later, Cass woke up in the hospital. It turned out she had taken too many pills. Now Cass was constantly sleepy, unable to work anymore. One evening while Matthew went out to get food, All the electrical appliances in the house began going crazy. Cass couldn't take it anymore. Detective Lawson visited again to speak with Cass, who was clearly in a poor mental state. Detective Lawson was here because of another anonymous call to the police. Someone had reported seeing Cass return to the place where Jane's body was found. Cass didn't deny it. She also handed the detective an earring, stating that it might be hers. Cass hadn't reported it earlier because she didn't know how. This could turn the case around entirely. The detective also found it odd that Cass's best friend, Rachel Crawford, shared a surname with the house's former owners. Cass said it wasn't a coincidence. Rachel's family had indeed owned the house, but her grandfather had gotten involved in some kind of Ponzi scheme, and they lost everything. According to Cass, Rachel had supported her and Matthew's decision to buy the house. When Matthew returned, Cass told him about the earring. He in turn asked his wife to open a letter from Dr. Deakins. Her dementia diagnosis was confirmed. Cass didn't even cry. Despair gave way to numb acceptance. The next day, she contacted a security company and asked them to email her a copy of the contract. Susie visited Cass to support her. Cass asked Susie to give her the contact information for Kelly, Jane's best friend. Susie revealed a secret. Rachel had an affair with Kelly's husband, which led to their divorce. This meant that Jane and Rachel definitely knew about each other. Late in the evening, Cass was pursued on the highway by a car that forced her to the shoulder. Of course, Cass reported it to the police, but Matthew assured them that the dents on the car were old. Perhaps Cass's early dementia symptoms were manifesting again, and there had been no accident at all. Cass felt deeply hurt by her husband for not supporting her. Matthew in turn urged his wife to come to terms with her illness. The next day, Cass received a call from the security agency, informing her that they somehow had two contracts, one signed by Cass and the other by Matthew. Cass was baffled by how this was possible, as she hadn't even been home on the date the contract was signed. Something suspicious was clearly going on. Later, Cass met Rachel at the hotel restaurant. Cass shared that Matthew had become very cold. Perhaps he even had another woman. Rachel advised her friend to hire a private detective. She also said that she never trusted Matthew. Cass started all of this so that Rachel would admit to having an affair too. But Rachel kept avoiding the conversation and went to the restroom. It turned out that Rachel had a second phone. Cass stole it. That's how she found out that Rachel and Matthew were having an affair. It had been going on for a long time. And judging by the messages, their secret was about to be exposed some time ago. On the night of the tragedy, Jane caught them in the office. Rachel and Matthew had to get rid of the unwanted witness. In tears, Cass called her husband from Rachel's phone, but didn't say anything. Could she really not know Matthew at all? Cass was determined to get to the truth and found the crime weapon. She also realized that Rachel and Matthew had planned to get rid of her too so they could be together. Cass couldn't bear the thought. That evening, Andrew decided to visit his teacher again, but no one answered the door. Seeing Cass lifeless on the couch through the window, the young man urgently called an ambulance and the police. Matthew arrived as soon as he learned about the incident. Unable to hold back his emotions, Andrew told him that Cass hadn't survived. She was taken to the hospital. At night, Matthew and Rachel tried to find the phone Cass had stolen from the house. Suddenly the lights started to flicker. Then they saw Cass's silhouette. John attacked Matthew, and a fight broke out between them. At some point Rachel crept up from behind and knocked John out. In fact, Cass was alive and had only staged her death. Matthew and Rachel chased after her. The women started to fight fiercely, but Matthew intervened, knocking his wife out. Cass woke up at the house. Rachel and Matthew were planning to make Cass seem crazy to everyone. Rachel had always envied her friend, especially after the house was bought. Cass doesn't understand why Rachel did this to her. If Rachel had ever asked for anything, Cass would have given her everything. Realizing what was happening, Matthew intervened, and Rachel accidentally fatally wounded him. At that moment the police arrived. Rachel was arrested. She had been plotting revenge for many years. Additionally, Rachel is suspected of taking the life of Jane Walters. By the way, Matthew wasn't on a business trip. John quickly recovered, but Matthew didn't survive. It turns out that Rachel and Matthew had known each other for a long time. They had come up with a plan together to get rid of Cass and get the house. When Cass realized this, she asked John, Detective Lawson and Andrew to play along. Andrew, as a talented actor, brilliantly handled his role. Now she had told everything to Alex, Jane's husband. In fact, Cass didn't have early dementia. Matthew had been trying to convince her of it. Now she holds no grudge against Rachel or Matthew, determined to move forward without any anger in her heart.